How's everyone doing? Yeah? It seems like a long day? A little bit? Yeah? It's like, okay. Well, thanks for being here this afternoon. And that was a really good workshop description. Is that what we want to talk about? I guess is my first question for you all, because there's many different ways our hour can go, right? I have a presentation and talking points and kind of nuts and bolts of some of the systems I described this morning, and how working towards this idea of rewilding and what that even means, and how you integrate that to create an ecological system, and then how do you even start managing that? How do we start being, in some ways, ecosystem builders and managers, and working with the wildness component? How do we start integrating that into our system? That was what I came up with when they said, do you want to present in the afternoon? I said, yeah, I think that would be cool. But now I'm here, and I've had some amazing conversations, and I'm so glad at the diversity and perspective that everyone's brought to my experience here today. But there's pieces of paper in the middle of your table. If you haven't grabbed one yet, grab one. And if you need a pen, there's some pens there. And given with what I just said, and then also with what you're gaining or learning from today, is there anything particular you're wanting to have this session be about, right? Is there any specific thing? Like we were talking about what the soil is made of, and she's like, well, what was your name again?
Thailand.
Was it?
Thailand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thailand was saying, oh, that's like soil on the roof. Like, how does that work? If it gets heavy, doesn't it get heavy? And so we started talking about like the mix of the medium and the different things. It gets very specific, but that could be something we could, geek out about a little bit. And we can go off on tangents. I also want to say, so write something down, whatever it is. It could just say, why aren't there regenerative organic snacks? Or, whatever your question is on your mind, But also, if you are not getting what you want out of this hour together, and it's like 15 minutes in and you're like looking at the program going, God, I really wonder what they're talking about in the other room, you can leave. You're not captive and you're not hostage in this room, and it's not going to be awkward because I'm giving you permission right now. And so if you need to leave, or you want to go check something else out, or you're just saturated and you're like, I actually just want to go back to my room or do something before dinner, like you're totally free to do that. And I totally encourage that. I want to make sure that you're here for what you want. We had some conversations about high tunnels, so you guys could write that down. Like maybe you could talk some more about integrating wildness into my high tunnel or something. So whatever it is, just go ahead and write something down. And if you want to put your name on it, you can. But also, just give you a second to do that. And if you've already done something and you have a specific question for me that you want to shout out.
Who maintains, after you're finished with your garden or your farms on the roof, who maintains them?
Who maintains them?
Who's the farmer?
Okay, write that down. Yeah, write that down. It's a great one. Who's the farmer? Who's the farmer? Yeah, because I mentioned that earlier today. It's like farmer. I was having a LinkedIn, and if people aren't on LinkedIn, or if you do want to engage with me in a social context, that's the one I use. And there's some really rich debates that go on my page, because I am very curious with some of these folks that are in the space around how we do these different things. And one of them recently was about skilled farmers. And I got into this it wasn't a debate at all. It was a great conversation about just the need for farmers in general to do these management practices. And then if you're integrating it into the urban setting, and this is highly dense urban, it's on a roof, right? There's other urban farming that's, on the ground or peri-urban or around. I met an urban farmer the other day, and they were on 10 acres about 15 minutes outside of Atlanta. And they showed me a picture, and I go, how's that urban? And they're like, oh, because and it's like close to a densely urban area, so it's considered urban, and then the scale was small. So it was like, yeah, and I was like, okay, that makes sense. But I was like, under my sense, like I get really integrated into urban because I've just been really dialed into some of these like more contrived situations. Someone said earlier too about, it was your high tunnels, I think, of just like, or maybe was it that? It was in the earlier conversation just about, how we're creating something that doesn't seem natural, right? It's like I'm building, raised beds on top of rock, and it doesn't feel like it's in nature. And it's like agriculture in general, I think, is a very contrived situation. We're manipulating nature to serve our needs in general, but then how can we do that most with nature, and how can we work with it and model it after? And I think that's kind of some of the things I was going to get into with the wildness component and how we bring that in. So I think this presentation also gets into fertility management and how you do management of fertility. And so I can talk about who operates it, fertility. What are some of the other things people put on their paper?
I have biochar.
Biochar?
How you're charging it, and if you've seen any results as far as from test results.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was kind of a follow-up question I had, is what soil biological tests are you doing to gauge where you start and where you finish?
Okay. And what's two more to start off with?
How do you manage your soil temperature?
Soil temp. One more. This is like your golden moment to make sure I talked about what you want to talk about. Yeah.
How do you incentivize agri-hoods, right? So
Okay.
Can you make it beneficial for city planners, developers, realtors, home buyers? How do you do that? And do you have examples of successful ones?
Like the people who are going to buy into an agri-hood. Okay. All right. Did everyone write something down? Most of that? Okay, now you're going to get up and you're going to come up here and grab a piece of tape and you're going to put it on the wall. All right? So if everyone could come up, or you could delegate someone or whatever, but there's a bunch of tape right here. And I think there's tape for everyone. And you're just going to grab a piece of tape and you're going to put it up on the wall. This is another way for you to stretch your legs, move a little bit. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we can put them up on this side. That's good. No, that's fine. I was saying over there, over here. This is good. This is good. Yeah. Yeah, right there. Boom. Yeah. You can put it on that side too. Yep. Yep. There's some tape here. There you go. Yep. It's sticky. It's Gorilla tape. It's really good masking tape. It's like the duct tape. Okay. In the fall, we're going to be doing, we have a regenerative organic learning center at Angela's farm in Vermilion. Is that how you say it? Yeah. Vermilion, yeah. And also at Luke Peterson's farm over in Minnesota, another couple hours away. And we're going to, host a field day where we integrate a lot of, and co-create that with her. So there'll be information that goes out to you all from this conference about how some of that will develop. So when is it? It's going to be the first week in August. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to come back to some of these. These are really great. The soil temperature, livestock integration essential to regenerative system. How does that apply to replace in an urban setting? Good question. How do you overcome zoning issues, pest issues, pollinator limitations? Yeah, so I'm going to go for a half an hour, address some of these, and then come back to this. Okay, but you can remember your question too, and this is also good feedback for me to integrate into my next talk when I address a group like this. So, do anybody know who Masanobu Fukuoka is? Yeah, a couple of people. So he wrote a really good book called The One Straw Revolution. If you need just kind of like a spiritual anchoring into some of these concepts and stuff from a different, Asian perspective, but the idea that, we're cultivating our own spirit through the idea of farming. And his farming is sometimes seen as like do-nothing farming, which is totally not it. It's a natural style of farming where it was setting the conditions conducive for life to flourish. Plants don't need us to grow, but they need the right conditions to do what we're asking them to do. So you basically set the stage and then you get out of the way and then come in at the right timing and the right place to encourage and to grow. And Michael Pollan put it really good in one of his books. Who's cultivating who? And he does one on the corn, where it's like, the corn, like we plant it and we're bringing it its food. We're doing all these things for the plant. We're spreading its seed. It's created, it's gone around the world by the hand of man. And it's like, well, are we cultivating the corn, or is the spirit of the corn actually, are we at its beckoning, in that sense? So looking at the spirit of things, but also just the idea that, the ultimate goal of farming, this is something I've come back to a lot, is just like, and you can get into the nuance of perfection and whatnot, but just that there's a cultivation of our own spirit within this. And my background, I touched on some of this earlier. I started working in a farm in Sonoma County and started farming water first, this idea of planting water into the landscape. And that idea has driven a lot of my work, in the sense that we're putting water into the ground and then we're planting on top of that, as opposed to planting and then bringing water to it. And so in California, we only get like 3 to 4 months of rain and water, and the rest is dry. And it's usually, here it was about 40 inches of rain in that time. Other places it's 20, other places it's 60, so it all depends, but it's a very wet and then a very dry time. And so distributing that water through irrigation is a big labor and a big cost, but then the best storage of all is in the ground. And so if there's a way to build that soil biology, but then also put the water where you want it in those storm events. And so the idea of like farming on contour or just slightly off contour, key line design, these were things I got early on. This is like 2003, so that's when you go, oh dang, I remember 2003. Oh, that was 3 years ago. It's like time goes. But these were, and then it all is in context and appropriate, because it's like, yeah, this is good for a perennial system. It's really difficult for an annual system, because the ground gets super saturated and then you can't get in there at the right time. So understanding and learning keyline design, if people don't know about keyline farming and non-inversion tillage with a keyline plow, it's a drylands broadacre practice from Australia that was popularized by P.A. Yeomans and has been applied in different ways, but there's some very specific nuances about finding points on the landscape where water collection meets water dispersal. And when you find that point, it's already predetermined, you can either go in a plowing pattern to or from that area if you want to collect water and build a pond, or take that water and distribute it subsurfacely through what's called a keyline plow, which is basically a precision ripper with a slipper on the bottom that kind of fractures and does it, but it does it in a very precise way. So that was some really cool things doing. Again, it was kind of small scale, a lot by hand. I then went to where I grew up down in Big Sur and managed a farm right on the coast, right on the edge of the ocean, which was, a retreat center called Esalen Institute, and it's year-round production. But that was a place I was at for a number of years where I was able to really start integrating all these ideas. So if you have an opportunity to be in a place and experiment, do it. It could be your farm, but if it's someone else's farm, it's better. And if you make mistakes, that's good too, because you often get to eat your mistakes, depending on what it is and how you're doing it. Because sometimes you can't sell them, but you can eat them. We grew lots of kale there. This was one of the fields we put in, and it's still smaller scale, but it was at a space where I was like, okay, this is abundance. And then it was mixing things up. So this is where I really started doing the different types of crop interplanting, relay planting, and really getting into doing that. It's the more, we were having this discussion earlier, the more you do, the more you have to do. And the more involved you get, the more involved the system gets, the more energy you have to start putting into it, right? So if you start intercropping or doing one bed and then out of the thing, then you're like bringing the tractor in and having to go. It's very different than if you're just doing the whole block or something. I've gotten away from this as I've scaled in different things to go in more blocks and be not as diverse. And the one thing that this does help with is we have a big issue with symphyllans in crop rotations on the coast, and one of the times that it becomes not an issue is when you just diversify your crop rotation in crop, meaning like, or in season, not just, so you're like creating a lot of diversity within the planting, the symphylan ratios go way down and almost they're not a problem. But if you're doing like, 5 or 6 beds or that whole bed of kale or something where it can then translate through it, it then can become a problem. So that was when I was like, okay, just the diversity of crop planting can help with different pest pressures and predation and stuff. Now this is where the wildness part comes in, because in my land management focused on food production, I was also looking at, I'm a lover of the backcountry, the wilderness, spending lots of time hiking. And whenever I would go into nature, I would look at the forest, right? Or look at the mountains, the way in which the vertical rock and the plants hanging on and stuff. And I was just like in awe of just that design and the actual ability for plants and nature to do some of that stuff. And I remember looking at this one wall of rock with plants and stuff, and I go, there's no way humans could even think about trying to build something like this. First of all, the raw material of just all that rock, and then to get a plant to hang on, and then you're looking at some of these landscape architecture projects where they're spending, millions of dollars trying to emulate that stuff, and it doesn't even come close to what nature can do. And I got involved in a project, this is in 2010, with a owner who wanted to create a farm with rotational grazing and all this stuff, and they had 170 acres, and it was very wild. It was very untouched. It hadn't actually been logged or grazed, and they were coming in, they wanted to farm it. And they asked me to come and help them, and I actually was there, and I lived on site, and I worked with them. And as I observed and saw what they wanted to do, I said, well, let's think about what the farm is. And they go, what do you mean? I go, well, what do you think the farm is? They're like, well, we just want the land to generate. We want to live off the land or with the land. They had these ideas about that. And I said, well, so you're not attached to the crop? And he said, no, not really. Just want to have like some kind of farm. And so what we came up with was, I looked at what was missing in the market and what would be valuable in relationship to the context of this wild piece of land. And what was does anybody guess what was like, okay, this is California. Someone asked me earlier about, when you think of California right now, what do you think of? What's just happened there that's like devastating? Fire, right? Everyone's like, are you okay with the fire? So fires happen throughout California. It's just part of the ecosystem. One of the things that's missing after a fire is in the restoration is the native grasses, native perennial bunch grasses. There's only 1% left of that ecosystem. It's an endangered ecosystem, but it is the one with the deep tap roots. And the price per pound of native bunch grasses is like huge. It's a perennial crop, and you can integrate it into a forest system, and it just is really regenerative in that regard. So we came up with the whole process of creating a native native perennial bunch grass seed farm on their land, which it got to a certain point. It was totally viable. The owners ended up selling the property and not wanting to do it because they ended up like building a big house and doing stuff, and then they wanted to move closer to town. And the farm went into what at that point? It just went into its native regeneration. So there's native bunch grass crop there that if at any point the farmer or whatever wanted, or new land steward wanted to make that a generation, he could, but if he doesn't, it's just a native system that's on its own. So it actually doesn't need any management and can go, and it's restoring the native habitat. But the thing that was most important when he said, well, how do we know what the success of this project is gonna be? And I said, we worked with the NRCS, we worked with the RCD on getting on a salmon restoration project. And we're releasing 10,000 a coho into the creek on the property. And we did that for 3 years. And in the 5th year, they had salmon, and now they have native salmon running back up this creek for the ecological system of the whole watershed. And it was this day, actually, he said, well, how are you going to measure if we succeeded? And I said, it doesn't matter what farm we do, what kind of house you build or whatever. If there's salmon running in this creek, then we're good. And he's like, okay, that makes sense. And that's kind of the idea of like, if we can start designing and thinking about the other species in the watershed and in our context, and what's the long-term regeneration or restoration that we're trying to do? And can we start designing for that? So that was like a big aha moment where then I said, okay, if I'm going to start integrating this, designing these farms and stuff and putting stuff on roofs, how do I make space for wildness? Because are there any people here who've done permaculture training? Any permaculture design training? Okay, so in permaculture design, we have this idea of zonation and frequency of use, and you place elements in relative location for energy efficiency. It's an energy efficient placement pattern system so that you can be efficient with your resources and whatnot. And you put things in frequency of use, but within that, you have a point of origin from which you work, and then you have these zones that are like, you know, two or three times a day, 2 or 3 times a week, 2 times a month, and you put things in sort of a location. But then there's zone 5, which is considered the wild space. And it's the place we go to seek inspiration, and we're not managers. And in that design system, you try to bring that zone 5 close to your home so that you're constantly inspired. And what I realized was in urban environments and even in our farms, we don't necessarily design for the wildness to be present. We don't bring it in. We actually push it out or do stuff. And therefore, when we want to go be inspired, we often leave the farm or leave the city because we're not. Where are we going? We go to the wild, we go on vacation, we do these different trips to get inspired, and we go to a place that we're visitors, we're not managers. And so that brought me to the concept, what if we were to start designing in a way where we were designing with nature and wildness in mind, creating that, and if that then started to take shape, maybe then that would provide inspiration and our cities would be more inspiring to live in. So it's like, okay, well, what does that look like? And where can I create wildness? And wildness needs habitat. And so that habitat, I showed this earlier, again, some of the design systems. And this is the wildness that I grew up in. This is in the Ventana Wilderness, Los Padres National Forest, Big Sur, 5,000-foot peaks, amazing space. And I constantly go back there to learn. That's like during indirect experience, right there. That's what I say. Where'd you go to school? I'm like, that's where I went. And then if we can take how do we get the urban-rural corridor going with this? And for me, you can say like pattern is the envelope of pulsation, right? And we create patterns in our farms. And that pulsation of scale is something we always have to bring into context. Because I can say like, oh, how are you going to do this? And he's like, well, what's the scale? Like, what are you working on? We were talking with the USDA in that other room, and they say an hour and a half to get somewhere. And it's like, well, we're talking about scale of production, scale of things. So we have to constantly see how we can scale it. And for many of you, you're working at a much larger scale. For me, I was like, okay, 5 to 10 acres of production, but then I'm coming into 1 acre or a quarter acre in the urban environment, which a quarter acre of real estate in the urban environment is a lot of space, right? And when you start going from acreage down to square footage, because in the urban environment, you're trying to maximize every square foot. And so what happens then is you get super efficient. You get super efficient with what is. You don't have big tractor turnarounds in different areas. It's like every space is being utilized because every space is a square foot that you're trying to design. Is this good? Yeah? Okay, I'm going to get to the questions. And so I showed this earlier, the idea that bring these buildings to come to life. The buildings are lifeless, right? They're static. And so I grew up building houses with my dad in Idaho and stuff. And what I realized is like you could leave on a Friday and come back Monday morning and it's where you left it. The board's where you left it. Things where you leave on Friday on a farm and people are already going like, yeah, you come back Monday. It's like, oh, fuck, that broke and that thing grew and that fell over. The wind did it. You know, there's so much life happening. Things are moving. They're super dynamic. And so what happens is you bring life into a building, that seems really great and amazing, but it's also creates you're starting to create a whole ecosystem of activity and things that are happening. And so you need managers. You need people who can actually know how to manage this system and are participating. And if they go home on Friday and Sunday morning, there's a storm that's come up and you have a silage tarp that you've been doing silage tarping on the roof, and you get a call from the fire department saying, hey, there's a 30-foot, by 100-foot tarp that's just flying off your roof. You got to go, you can't go, oh yeah, I'll come in on Monday and figure it out. No, you got to get there, do it. It's like, so there's a commitment of the farmer, and in a space where you're removed from the farm, you're living across town, you're not on the farm, there's that whole dynamic that needs to take place. So there's a lot of other things that are happening in the urban environment. But I showed this earlier without the idea of the rewilding. When you bring in, so pollinator habitat, right? There's gonna be he's talking about pollinator habitat tomorrow and stuff, and it's like, it's a missing part in the urban environment. We don't have as much pollinator habitat. It gets displaced. Wildness isn't designed in the space. It's not considered. And it's not seen as an ecological service that's valued. Now more and more it is, and now pollinator habitat's like, oh, bees are actually really important to our diet, and butterflies and hummingbirds, and not only do they look good and I feel good when they're around, they're actually doing a lot of ecological services. Every third bite is because of bee pollination. So we have to create more habitat for them. And putting in these perennials, native ones, when we're doing this, we're also being conscious of the design. So what this looks like is we need, for organic production and integrated pest management, we need beneficial insect habitat. And aphids, ladybugs, green lacewing, syrphid fly, like we need populations of these beneficial insects. They need a nectar source year round in order to take up residence. So we create a hedgerow, and there's been a lot of work done on this in hedgerows, and especially in Central California with the natives, of making sure you have pollinator habitat year-round with a nectar source, so the flowering of the plants follow each other. And so then when you know that, then you can design it out to where you know the different habitats. Here, where it freezes and different stuff, then there's other habitat, right? I don't know if you're going to talk about this tomorrow at all, about just different habitats and stuff. Yeah, so, because it's like, you might say, oh, we got to clean up all these leaves or do all this stuff, or like, I got to cut back this print. It's like, no, that's native habitat for overwintering of your beneficial bugs. So it's like a different way of approaching how you manage the ecosystem. Now, what was, build it and they will come. These are some of the plant lists that we put together when we do this. And this is on the Oakland roof, a native area that, we have, it's interesting. It's like, here's the tie-offs for the window washing and stuff that's integrated in there. But what happens when you start doing this is now you have ground nesting birds nesting on the roof in a space because you didn't clean it up, and you created, you allowed space for wildness. Now, if you were a landscaper, mowing, blowing, just doing stuff, or a farmer who's just like super clean and anal about all that, and you're not leaving stuff for that, this doesn't happen. But when you leave it and you give it space to happen, then they come back. And then what was really interesting, I walked around one day and there's a hawk just chilling, hunting off the garden. And I was like, okay. And they started taking up residence, and then we had a year-round hummingbird. And then the next year there was 4 hummingbirds that just stayed, because then they knew it was on their radar. And then the crow, and then, some of the habitat isn't beneficial. I often joke that when the gopher shows up on the roof, I'm done. Or a deer, I'm like, okay, that's when I do stop farming. But the crows are big. People go, what's your biggest pest? You don't have a gopher. I said, well, I have flying gophers, and they're called crows, and they're super smart. And they go, oh, what do? I go, they punch holes in my irrigation. And they dig up the things because they know the irrigation's all on timer, because we can do that with the technology. And so they show up 2 minutes before, and they go from roof to roof, and we adjust the timer based on the heat and stuff. So sometimes it goes slightly off. And when it doesn't flow at the right time, they just start pecking it, like, where's my water? Because they're there for water. And they just like peck holes and different stuff, and you have to scare them off. but it's a small price to pay. First world problems, I guess. But create, and then it's beautiful too. It's like creating these, this is for a lot for the ladybug, the yarrow and stuff. For we do cut flower, these hedgerows, they're for wild, but then they create beauty, and you also can create a product off of it. So we often do cut flowers, which are super high, like cash crop, and we do a lot of filler and a lot of growth from the perennial hedgerows, and having that in there. And actually those perennials like it. They like to be cut back and managed in that way. So question about, yes? Halfway, okay. So I'm going, yes?
You were talking about the crows.
Crows.
Just watering the crows.
Water the crows?
Do you have a water?
Oh, we did. Yeah, we put water out and stuff, and I think they just, we call them the frat boys. I think they just like to fuck with us. So it's like, we did put out little things. That was one of the farm managers. She's like, what if we just put out water? I was like, okay. They put out water, and then they were just kind of like, no, we like the fresh drip of the irrigation. I'm going to geek out here for a second, but ask a question about who operates the farms. So that is a really crucial point. And I operated them first, and then we did trainings to train other farmers, and then we started a nonprofit to do trainings. The nonprofit, I actually think the best way is there's farmer nonprofits, urban agricultural nonprofits that want to create food access, food security, different stuff. A lot of them don't have the skills necessary. And if you are a farmer that lives close to an urban area, one of the things I would say that you could probably generate some resources for yourself, create relationships, create connection, broker some of your product or whatever, is you contact a local nonprofit and say, hey, how's your farmer training going? I'm a local farmer. I'm really interested in creating some network relationships, and I could definitely share a thing or two. Because we need to have more farmer to urbanite relationship in that regard. But the nonprofit, we did a farmer training, and then they operate that farm. The first farm I showed in Berkeley, that one I gave over to an organic flower farmer, was through a relationship. She was driving an hour and a half to her farm and she lived 2 blocks away from this farm. And she always was like, God, I love that farm. I wish I had a farm on there. And then when I was like, hey, I'm leaving, do you want to take over that? And she had to go from 2 acres down to a 1/4 acre, but she didn't have to drive 3 hours a day. And then she had immediate access to her market, and then she could host events and then she started focusing more on the arrangement. And then she worked with a farmer friend of hers that did larger scale farm and started buying some of those at wholesale, and then just pivoted a little bit and then started generating 20% more income for herself without having to drive as much. She could bike to work, and it was like, okay. So finding those relationships is key. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Brooklyn Grange, they approach buildings and say, hey, we want to farm your roof. What would you lease it to us per square foot? And the owner's like, yeah, that would be great. They take care of the install costs, they do a thing, and then they develop their business model off of that, and they pay a lease per year off the roof. I was approached by the farmer, which gets to the agrihood question. Who asked that question? You asked that question like, how does that incentivize? How do you get people to pay for that? And it's a lifestyle, and it's an amenity, basically, of the building. So these are residential buildings that have a need to provide an amenity to the people that live in the building. They also have certain permits and obligations of creating open space, dealing with stormwater management. They have these different criteria that they have to do when they do these urban projects. The roof can serve a lot of those functions. They can do open space, they can create an amenity, they can do stormwater management, they can do pollinator habitat, they can get all these different things all on the roof. Then they can actually increase the density of the development, because stuff they would normally have to do on the ground, they can do on the roof. They can then expand their footprint and get more units, which means more money for them. So they're like, okay, this is good. Let's do that. We'll hire you. So in my case, I was able to be hired. They paid for it. They installed it. But they said, we don't want to have to pay anything for it once it's up. So get an operator who could do it, and you'll pay us a nominal amount, pay for the water, and $10 a year as a lease. And it's like, okay. And so that's how that operation goes. At one point they said, can we we just want a living roof. We don't want to farm on the roof because of all the people and different stuff. Can we just do it as a living roof? And I was like, you could, but then you're going to have maintenance fees. You're going to have a landscaper that's going to have to come up and manage it. And, it's just going to be a static landscape. I mean, yeah, you could do that. But I was like, for, the same, you're paying for all the infrastructure to go in for a living roof. Why not make it a farm? And I was really convincing in that regard. I think it was mostly because of the money, because they weren't going to have to then pay further on down the line for it.
Are there any programs that these carbon programs or?
Certain cities have certain incentives for pollinator habitat, stormwater management, and living roofs or solar-ready roofs. And so they will help pay for installation costs. And then urban, is there anyone from the NRCS here? Yeah, you're from the NRCS, all right. So there's urban projects with the NRCS, right? In some of them.
We don't do any rooftops in South Dakota.
No rooftops in South Dakota. But look at Toronto as far as rooftops. It's the one that had the first rooftop incentive program in North America, and they have over 1 million square meters of living roof in the city of Toronto. And that's to reduce the heat island effect and to deal with stormwater management, especially in the summertime when they have these big floods. So it's like there's reasons why it's helpful for the city's infrastructure to do that. And then is it the CSP program with NRCS, right? Is constant management. So if you're looking at conservation practices, translating those into the urban environment, how could some of these management practices meet some of those goals? That's a discussion that's on the tip. That's the next thing of like, can we integrate some of these conservation practices into the urban environment where people are living and where actually we have bigger issues of erosion and channeling and different, because then where does it go? So it's like, different discussion there.
We're not close to that yet.
No.
So,
No.
I'm not saying it won't happen, but yeah, we definitely, we haven't think about how to do it ground yet, so.
I know. Well, it's like, what's the story? Where's it going to be 10 years from now?
Yeah.
And thinking about this, getting things involved, getting systems up, there were some questions about testing and whatnot. I want to just talk about the overburden. So on a roof, you have what's called an overburden. It's everything above the waterproof membrane. And so I designed this like a self-irrigated planter. You guys could say this is your bedrock and you're growing on top of it. The thing is here, we created like a drain wick layer. So it percolates through, it gets saturated, and then the roots come in and can wick this material up. Someone asked a question about soil temperature on the roof, right? So how does the soil heat up? For one, it's super exposed. It's up on the roof. If the soil's exposed, it heats up more. So one way to manage that is just by creating as much coverage and armor as possible on the soil. The other one is that it's a very it's very shallow, but also there's buffer below. It's not just the Earth's mantle that it's on. And so you actually have heat coming up from the building in the winter time, which is a benefit because then you're regulating when on a cold day, but also we're in the Bay Area. It never gets too hot or never too cold. So it's a little nuanced in that regard. It's like, it is it never really gets over 85, 90 degrees and it never gets colder than 55. Yeah. Too high, too low, how do you manage that? And so the armor and the biological process is really a key thing. This is my drawing, and then working with the landscape architect, this is how it gets translated into a section for the building, same thing. But then we translate and we have to get creative around how it's all washed out, but how we put these all into a drawing set. And so these are all systems I designed and developed with him on the fly through the projects, right? So looking at other systems and then saying, okay, how does it depend? How do we do these drains? How do we do this drain wick layer? How do we do edges on pedestals? So it's a lot of specifics there, how you get the material up. Someone was asking questions about this. This one, we blew the material up with a big truck, right? The neighbors hated us for about 4 days because it was so loud. But that's how we got the material up. And this is that drain wick layer. And then we put all the layers on top. Any questions about this stuff? Because I can blow through this pretty. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so you have to do an assessment, and one initial one is you're better off if it was built before the war of the 40s. So if it's pre-1940, it's usually much more robust concrete and it can handle more weight on the roof in general. Even then, you still have to do an assessment and see what's on the roof and also how many stories it is. Because sometimes you'll have a building that goes up and then there might be another story over here. So the construction here is the same, so that second roof might be easier. You know, like sometimes you have a 5-story building, but then there's 3 stories on one side. That top of that 3rd story can most likely handle the weight because the whole building's built the same way often to hold those other stories. One big low-hanging fruit is car garages. The top story of a car garage is often never populated, and you could take away a few or a section of the parking. And in doing that, you would do it on a mobile pallet system, right? Where you basically build that whole system. This is just imagine this as a pallet instead of a roof, that then you could come up and daisy chain them together and link them all up. And then if in the future, for whatever reason you had to remove it, you could put them on a truck and take it away. That's what Michael Abelman and the Soul Food Farm does. They come into vacant lots that aren't being used and they farm them. And then if in the event they have to move them, they can. So. But then say a building like this, you're like, okay, here it's going to be much harder to put anything, but over the load-bearing wall, you can put a planter, usually. So you kind of assess, and then it's usually cost prohibitive to do any retrofitting of something like this. And it's like, is the effort really worth it when we got land right out there to farm? It's cool, but it's just a lot of cost. So, yeah, you had one? Yes.
And do they pay for the water?
No. Yeah. So you can get a irrigation exemption, a separate water meter if you want. That often costs a lot more than it's worth. But if you get, we've actually got petitioned and put in sub-meters and then worked with the municipality saying like, can we just not pay the discharge rate? Because often when you buy for the water, but you also pay a percentage for what's going back into the water treatment. And so we get an exemption saying like we're using this much water, and then we have a meter that monitors that they can monitor. We report it every month, and then they adjust the bill for that. But honestly, like a lot of them just kind of, they don't even really pay attention, which is kind of weird. I'm just like giving it to them, and they're like, okay, and then we like pay it, and like I'm like, no one's really, I could just like take off a zero if I wanted to. Like they're not gonna check it. But this is one in San Francisco that was solar and planter based. So we just had these planters and walkways and stuff, and then there was solar integrated, much smaller, just a couple. And this is like on the other side of that, like a mass planter that we put in. And then the soil mix. Okay, it's a lightweight engineered medium. The idea that soil health is human health. So what we're putting into the soil, what makes up the soil, this is universal across all of our farming systems, is that we should look at our soil as kind of like our gut, and that there's a microbiome of life going on, just like in our gut. And actually, when you compare them, they're very similar. But the way we take care of the soil is the way we're going to take care of ourselves. And so the idea how that translates, does that make sense? Yeah? And that most of our diseases are based on our chronic inflammation of the gut. And why is the gut inflamed? Like, what are we feeding it? Processed foods, but also like the residues of pesticides and herbicides. So like some people say they're gluten intolerant, but actually is it by using glyphosate to desiccate the wheat, and that gets brought up in there, and then that gets processed, and then we get that. And for kids, it's bioaccumulated. They're little. So that gets actually the parts, it's different. And so then those can lead to long-term health issues, to gluten intolerance, right? So then it's like, oh, I'm gluten intolerant. It's like, well, actually, it's just because you're eating these Cheerios that are laden in glyphosate. So, and that will be an interesting conversation and story to see unfold. But that's our first mechanism of defense, is our gut when anything comes. The reason why brown, black, and indigenous people were more susceptible to COVID when it came is because their guts were more inflamed because of the processed foods, because they didn't have food access to because of the food issues around food access and food, costs. So the cheaper the food, the more processed and unhealthy it often is. So I designed the medium, like I was saying, and someone was asking about the biochar. This is a close-up of what it looks like after the fines and the rain has gone through. So when we churn the bed, it looks more like soil. But then very quickly, those tops, they kind of go in. And what does it look like? It's mostly rock. It is 50% lava and pumice. And then there's some biochar in there as well. And then there's the compost and the wood, there's fir bark and great pumice, and it's a whole diversity. It's about 12 different ingredients. Now what's interesting is we till it, we go out, we plant, and then water comes. This is about 2 weeks after we had sown. This is a cover crop that we had sown in there with the cedar. But what happens is a lot of the fines go down. You dig in and it's right underneath there. It's more soil-based. It's like, but 50%, what happens is the rocks the fines go down, and then what happens is this like kind of rock mulch forms on top, which helps with wind erosion, because one of the issues on the roof is you have a lot of wind and things blow off. And so having the more rock on there actually becomes a benefit in that regard. And then the biochar, again, I can't understate how, what an incredible soil conditioner biochar is. And it's something that often, gets spoken about. It's like a holy grail. You can do all this cool stuff with it, and then it doesn't get adapted. It's, a stabilized carbon material. It doesn't break down, right? So it stays around for a long time, like 100+ years, no problem. And it's often a byproduct of an industry. Like for us, we use the logging industry. And so it's sawdust that's from the mills that then they put it through a kiln. But then in order for it to be biochar, it's activated. It's activated with compost or some kind of inoculant and then it's aged. So the pH gets naturalized so that when you incorporate it into your soil, it's not gonna set the chemistry off. So you need to have aged biochar, and it needs to be inoculated and charged. But it is, as far as soil home for bacteria, this is a close-up, the amount of surface area that things can live in, different bacteria can colonize onto it. It's pretty, it's very impressive, and its water holding capacity is huge. Again, these are from some of the pictures from before. I was sharing the different things. This, our fruit porn, or there's a veggie porn here. It's just like, you look at this stuff, you're like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Space is beautiful. And then fertility management, the water, doing composts on the roof. We do all small batch composts on the roof. Nothing leaves the roof. So we take that stuff, we churn it, we make very dynamic piles that then get redistributed onto the roof. We monitor them, we chop stuff up. It's kind of labor intensive. But again, this was, it's a 1 acre roof. I'm featuring it just because it has so many really cool components to it. And there is a video on YouTube. This is the management. There's a video on YouTube. If you just put in Oakland rooftop garden, it'll come up because it has a lot of views on it. Guy Andrew did it for us, and it has a lot of really cool. He does some really cool stuff of everything I'm talking about in just a condensed version. But this is, we have to do water balances. These are good to know with ETO rates and stuff for your own crops. But here we had to do it to understand what our water use would be with the municipality in applying for our permit. So that was really important. Talking earlier with you all about fertigation. Does anybody do fertigation, injection into their water systems with nutrients? Setting that up, yeah. So there's different injectors. This is a Hanna injector. This is a Mazzi injector, 2 Mazzi injectors. That basically you do a bypass where you then can inject whatever nutrients you want into your soil. So we do a lot of compost teas. So we have a Vortex brewer. It brews up 60 gallons at a time, and then we add fish or kelp or whether it's nitrogen or phosphorus, like whatever we want to tip it into, and then we inject it into the irrigation, kind of on a microdose level. So instead of feeding every 2 weeks a really heavy meal, we just inject kind of constantly at a much lower dilution than what's recommended. But that way, what happens is the plants then kind of have this, they have more resiliency when a weather event happens or something, because they're not stressed. They have the nutrients they need, they have the water they need. They're not getting overfed either, because that can be a problem, but they're getting this whole diversity. So they're not just getting water, they're getting some juice in that as well. But it also explodes. And this is what you want to have happen so there's a whole thing. If you haven't gone into compost teas and stuff, it's a really good thing, and the different mixes. We use BioLive, and these are some of the inputs that we use on the roof. We do bring up, through the elevator, we had to bring some straw and stuff, because that idea of heating up, keeping the soil covered, different stuff. This is after the planting of the garlic. And then this is the white Dutch or clover that we used as pathway. So you can see that the whole thing becomes covered and together. This is when we started, right? So this is right after installation, and we were sowing the first crops, and this is what it looked like. It was just completely bare, right? And so then you plant them in, the hedgerows start going in. This is right before, this is interesting. These are out of order. This was buckwheat and fenugreek that we planted in the first year, and you can see none of the hedgerows were planted. And then we came in with bigger boxes and stuff, and then recycled it. And then now, we've integrated these pathways that are planted, which are, have really transformed the way in which we do the management. The tools, we use these really cool tilters, all these kinds of different like specialty hand tools that are there for the market grower. And then the integration of cover crops onto the roof. I didn't do that at first, because I was like, how can you integrate cover crops on the roof? Because it's going to be, you're going to be building soil mass, but actually it all gets eaten up by the plants. And so, these are just succession of how we manage the cover crops, them growing to the maturity, the bell beans, and then cutting them down, layering them, covering up with silage tarps. That's what I was talking about, that blew off the roof ones. Can you grow root crops? Yes, we can grow different carrots. We select for very specific crops that do well in shallow profiles, but they're amazing. And this is when you pull off the silage tarp, how the biology has basically broken down all of the material in about 3 weeks. And then we can get ready to, some of it we layer and stuff, and then cover, and then we prep them, and then plant them intercrop using different tools in that regard. And then there's kind of the succession through. And then someone asked where the food goes, and we take it to food hubs. This specific one goes to people experiencing food insecurity in deep East Oakland. And the nonprofit has worked with the city of Oakland to create a food utility, where people in the city have access to free food. And that's through a utility program with the city. And the way that that's done is by taking health dollars that the city is and reallocating them to farmers to get on the front end of where disease might happen. So I'm going to stop there with some more of your questions. And incentives for agro-hoods, you're selling a lifestyle. So developers, I think, are interested. Who here knows that there's a city, there's farmland all around it, the city wants more land to develop. The farmer doesn't want to sell it, people don't want to sell it, they want to protect the farmland. That's a common issue, right? And the farmer's like, fuck, I could actually sell the land and get this much money, but I don't want to sell the land and stuff. Well, what about developing it in a different way where the farm can be integrated into the development? And so that's something that I feel needs to be a discussion, because often the developer is just going to keep fighting until they get what they want, and then everyone's going to be unhappy. But if you say, hey, okay, you want to develop this land, what if we were to do it in a way where the farm is involved and integrated, and the roof runoff? A friend of mine's doing this in Northern California, where they did the development, they did the farm, but then they're using all the water resource management going to feed the perennial orchard system and do all that, so they're like, how do we use the infrastructure that's going to be built to actually serve an ecological function? And when that collaboration starts to happen, that's when I think we can start designing really good systems for the future to be in. And then we can see them not as separate, only all or nothing. It's like, oh, you just can build and you just have a farm over here, but how can we integrate them? So, any other specific questions people had that they wanted to share? Yeah?
How can we be like you when we grow up?
I'm not, no. Well, here, this is it. So, Bernstein Bears, right? So, Farmer Ben. My kids thought, they're like, Dad, they wrote, I told them kind of as a joke. I was like, yeah, they wrote a book about me back in the day. So, Brother Bear, he asked Farmer Ben, he says, farming is a big task. My question is this, is it hard or is it fun? He says, yeah, it's hard and we love it, son, but I guess you might say it's hard fun. So I think the way to do that and incorporate is that we show that it is hard fun. And that's how we relate our experience to the rest of society. Is that, yeah, it's hard work, but man, I love it. They go, what do you love about it? I get outside, I get to do this, got my food, we got community. And I think it's more too about what's happening in the background of how we can really be proud as farmers and as land stewards and reinvigorate that village renaissance that we've kind of been consistently, our culture has consistently supported the division and the breakup of farming communities because the way our capitalist system works is that we're individual and we're all striving to do our own thing. And so we're constantly being resupported by, society to be separate. So if we can help break that mold, gather more in circle, come together, have, come over and have food and share, it's sometimes awkward at first. Y'all get together, I don't know how to do this. I don't have anything for the potluck and stuff. But then, you start doing it and some really magical stuff can happen. And I'm not grown up yet, so I'm asking myself that same question.
Say, with my, now that my children are 25 to 19,
Yeah.
4 of them. So now I'm like, well, maybe it's my turn. And they did not learn about Bernstein Bears in New Zealand.
Yep.
We didn't use those. We didn't have those stories.
Okay.
So, but I have those stories.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bring the old stories back, I guess. Yeah. You guys have any questions? What did you guys write anything down on the paper? No? Taking notes? Yeah. I mean,
About soil testing, you doing the soil testing or?
yeah, thank you. Yeah, so at the whenever we design, start the process, we do soil testing prior to installation and then 6 months after installation and then once a year. And that was done through the UC Berkeley. They ended up, because we were like, yeah, we could do this, but education experience, got any soil students that would love to work with us? And so every year we get 1 or 2 students that inquire, because we've said that then come and then we interview them, and then they work on learning their skills in assessing soils and stuff in urban environments. So they do that, and I didn't bring any of those tests and stuff, but they're really interesting in the fact that they're pretty stable. Like, we don't see a lot of deficiencies, but we also don't see a lot of building, even though we're doing all this building and stuff. I think it's because we're doing 4 to 5 rotations in a year on the roof, because we're growing high rotation crops, things that are like 30 to 40, 50 days, and then we're churning, and then we're amending, and then we're doing, so we're doing 4 or 5 rotations in one plot. But then also on 1 acre, we're generating over what would be the equivalent of almost $200,000 in produce, right? And with 3 people. And its cost of living is really high, so it equals out in there, but the price of the product is really high. But also that food is then given away. So we monitor what we give away and we put a price tag on it, but then it's given to these food hubs, and through USDA grants, Urban Ag Innovation Grant, we got one of those for 3 years. We got what was the other one? We got a community food NIFA grant, right, with the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And then we got they got some philanthropic institutional funding as well. And it was to prove the model that if you did this and did this, you know, you could generate health. And so then they went to the city and said, hey, could we start allocating your climate and health dollars towards a Department of Agroecology to start transforming the city park, these other open spaces, into food-bearing production areas to then provide food for people. So, yeah.
Case studies for the park, for example? I know we've got some people that are trying to get it.
I don't personally, and I always see that as like something that's just missed. My experience with the Department of Parks and Rec in San Francisco and also Oakland has not been good, because they don't want to have a highly managed integrative system. And so they usually tend to be like, oh, no, that wouldn't work, and oh, this and that, and you're going to have pests, which is a problem. You're going to have more predation, you're going to have more squirrels and rats and different things because you're not harvesting and the food's being left. But if you're actively managing and doing that, there shouldn't be a bunch of spoils, right? Same with the compost pile. Just manage the compost pile, right? It's not going to attract a lot of smell or people or, you know, animals and stuff. So that's, again, the skilled farmer knowing that and having a good system, right? So that is the weakest link, I think. Yeah, yeah. Any other questions or thoughts before we go to the happy hour? Is there a happy hour? No, I don't know. There should be. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you all very much. I think we're at time. Yeah. Yeah. I just want to thank you all very much for staying, for one, writing up these questions. I'm going to be looking at these, and if there's any, and probably, again, follow me on LinkedIn, because I'll make a post about this. I'll probably, you know, say, hey, someone asked this question, and put it on there. But if there's any further thoughts, questions, connections, you know, Top Leaf Farms is the website of the company, but then my name, Benjamin at regenorganic is .org is a good email. You can also be topleaffarms@gmail or farmtheroof@gmail. Those are my other two ones. I have a number of hats I wear. But please stay in touch. And if you have a project in the urban environment that you get inspired about or you see potential with, you know, you can definitely reach out, because even if I can't respond, I have a very good network of urban growers and farmers, market gardeners, and people that have a lot of experience and are willing to share. Because I think that's one thing farmers have in common is, if, you know, we do want to share the information and transform our food system. So again, thank you all, and I hope you have a great dinner, and look forward to talking to you more.